Good afternoon, and welcome to the Wednesday afternoon conference call with Trusts Unlimited. This is Jim George speaking. I'm the non-attorney spokesman and facilitator for Trusts Unlimited, and I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to listen to this call, particularly those of you calling in for the first time and those that will be listening to the replay over the next 24 to 48 hours. The call's going to be a little bit different today. We're going to talk certainly about what's going on in Iraq, but I'm going to spend a little more time talking about what's actually going on in this country. As a matter of fact, last week I was considering just not having a call this week since this is the day before Thanksgiving. But there's so much going on that I think we need to touch on. I decided to go ahead and have a call for today. And since it is the day before Thanksgiving, I would like to wish all of you a very happy Thanksgiving. And despite all of the problems that we're dealing with in this country, we still have a lot to be thankful for. And so I want to extend those wishes. I did also want to mention that today is the 51st anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And actually, the presidency of John F. Kennedy does kind of touch on what I'm going to discuss today, and I'm going to, discuss that in more detail a little bit further into the call. One thing I did want to mention, though, I would suggest that you have a pen and paper handy because I am going to give you a little bit of homework, some things you need to look at. In my opinion, we're at a seminal moment in this country, and that's why today's call is going to deal to a larger extent, frankly, with what's going on in this country. But before we get there, let's go ahead and talk about what's going on in Iraq because things are happening. Today, of course, is November 23rd, and there is a closed session of the parliament in Iraq, which, of course, they're 8 hours ahead of us, so we don't know what the result of that was. But the parliament was going to be discussing on the agenda today their national sovereignty. Three issues of importance from our standpoint. One is that they were going to be discussing the fact that Iraq needs to sever some of the incestuous relationships that they've had with Iran, with the pro-Iranian officials that have been involved and all of the inherent corruption. That's one of the issues they were going to discuss. The second one is the reinstitution of their currency. If the country is moving toward genuine sovereignty, obviously they cannot be operating with the currency of another country, i.e. the United States dollar or any of the other currencies for that matter. They're going to have to rely on their own currency. And third, there were discussions about the presentation of the budget on December 9th. So that was an important parliamentary session, and we probably will not be getting information about that till sometime tomorrow. But there have been other things going on outside of the parliament. The Prime Minister Soudani and Governor of the CBI Galeb have had a series of private meetings which suggests that they're trying to develop a coordinated strategy to move forward. And as a result of those meetings, Soudani did release a statement saying that he was creating for the formation of a high commission to fight corruption, which again dovetails with many of the pro-Iranian officials whose loyalty, shall we say, to Iraq is questionable. And the governor of the CBI, Galeb, issued a statement explaining why it would be against the law to give a date and a rate for a change in the exchange rate or a change in the rate vis-a-vis the dollar. So the way I look at that is why even release a statement like that unless a change in the exchange rate is something that could be imminent. In addition, the United States has suspended money transfers to 14 Iraqi banks suspected of money laundering. Then we have the fact that both the government and the CBI have had a series of meetings with officials from the IMF, from the World Bank, and other international agencies. So it's clear from all of this that Iraq's trying to get their house in order for some seminal event that's going to be imminent. And I can't think of anything that would be more appropriate than the reinstitution of their currency. That's good news, of course, for all of us. So the way I would sum that up is I'm not saying that the change of the rate's going to happen tomorrow, and I'm not saying that it's going to be a dramatic change. It could be an incremental change, but I am saying based on the information we have, it could happen tomorrow, and at this point I wouldn't be surprised if it's happened during this call. That's where I feel we are. But having said that, let's talk about what's going on here in the United States and why the creation of your Family Asset Protection Trust is more important than ever. Now, we've spent over a decade marketing our trust to Dinarians for very good reasons that we've explained time and time again. But we find ourselves in a very unusual situation in the United States, and this trust product is every bit as important for an American citizen whether they hold currencies or not. And the next 6 weeks are going to really tell the tale. And what I mean by that is that for the next 6 weeks, we now have a lame duck session of Congress. Now, over the last couple of years, I've never seen the nation more divided. Frankly, I think this was by design. There are some nefarious people in government that have an agenda that's, in my opinion, anti-American. But what we have now is a lame duck session of Congress. That means that, and the lame duck session means we have a majority of Democrats. Now, their agenda is different than the agenda of the people that are more conservatives, let's say to the right of center. But they know that in order to get this agenda in place, since they no longer control the House, they're going to need to move on these things prior to the Republicans taking control of the House in January. So these are some of the things that could happen. I'm not saying they're all going to happen. Some of them are going to happen. Hopefully they won't all happen because, from my perspective, they're not good news. The first thing they've been talking about is the elimination of the filibuster in the Senate. Now, we have 3 branches of government. Congress is one of the 3 branches. Congress is divided. We have the House and we have the Senate. The House representatives are based solely on population. The Senate is designed to equalize states' rights by having each state have 2 senators. By eliminating the filibuster in the Senate, they're eliminating essentially all minority rights in this country. So when the Democrats say we're protecting our democracy, for most of us, we tend to accept the word democracy referring to our government, which is technically a constitutional representative republic. But it's obvious that when they say democracy, they mean not protect our democracy, but create one. Because if we have straight majority in the House and a straight majority in the Senate, we don't have a republic, and we have no official protection of minority rights. So that's dangerous there. There has been some talk about stacking the Supreme Court, basically adding 4 more seats to the Supreme Court, allowing the Democrats to pick 4 left-of-center judges in order to transition the court to a more liberal activist court. That's certainly something that most Americans who understand how our system works wouldn't want to see. This was attempted once before by Theodore Roosevelt. Not only was rejected, but it was so soundly rejected that they created term limits for the presidency. Unfortunately, they didn't go all the way and create term limits for the Congress, and I don't know whether that can actually ever be accomplished, but that would be a good thing in my opinion. The next thing they're talking about is the creation of a domestic carbon tax. This is part of their new Green Deal, and the way to create a new tax is just using the carbon tax, which does 2 things. It creates more revenue for them, and from their perspective, it creates less business less travel, less transactions. Because remember, from the perspective of the left, you want to grow government. From the perspective of the right, you want to grow the private sector. They're also talking about amnesty for illegals. As a matter of fact, Senator Schumer came out and basically said it's time to create amnesty. And he said, you have to listen to the words very carefully. He said, we need amnesty for the 11 million or however many there are illegals. There are probably somewhere between 30 and 35 million, and he's well aware of that. He just doesn't want to admit it. The reason he gave for the amnesty is it was so insulting. It's not even worth acknowledging. But to create amnesty for illegals means two things. It means the 30 to 35 million that are here will receive amnesty, and it means that it will open the floodgates on our southern border. The other issue is gun control, which is really gun confiscation. That's where they're going with this. And the last thing was the G20 vax passports. Biden just signed off on an agreement with the G20 nations for a vax passport, meaning if you have not been vaccinated, you cannot travel to any of the G20 countries. So this is a nightmare, and they have approximately 6 weeks to accomplish some, if not all, of this. But if they are successful in this, they will have essentially created a neo-feudal state where the elite, of course, can go where they want, do what they want, spend what they want, live what they want, and the rest of us are serfs that are going to be subordinated by all these arbitrary regulations. Now, most of this is to accomplish one thing: controlled movement. By controlling individuals' movements, you're able to control a lot. This is accomplished in three ways. One, the Green New Deal. Second, that's domestically. Second, the Vax Passport, that's international. And third is the central bank digital currency. And I've discussed the digital currency on a number of occasions, but I want to go into a little bit of a history of this because I don't think most people really understand what a fiat currency is and what the central bank is. Central bank system's been around for centuries, and over time it has got complete control of Western economies. The first central bank was created in the negotiations after the Revolutionary War. I believe it was 1791. That had a 20-year time before it had to be renewed. It had to be renewed in 1811. The United States government did not renew the London Central Bank. In other words, the Central Bank of London controlled the currency in the colonies of the newly formed United States. So that date should ring a bell. In 1811, the United States decided not to renew the London Central Bank, and what happened in 1812? The English invaded the United States. Bottom line, it was about money. Another central bank was created, domestic central bank, and that central bank was ended by Andrew Jackson. As a result of that, there was a scheme put into place so that he was not reelected. He took his case to the people, and 4 years later, he was reelected for a second term. We had no central bank again until 1913. In 1913, we had the creation of the Federal Reserve and the federal income tax. Now, the Federal Reserve is not federal. It's a private corporation, and it is not a reserve. There is no reserve. The federal government goes to them to borrow money. They just basically create helicopter money that the people can spend. And this is why our currency is devalued to the extent that it has. I'll give you an example. The Federal Reserve, again, was created in 1913. If you went back to 1813 to see how much goods and services you could purchase for $100, by 1913, 100 years later, you could purchase the exact amount of goods and services, meaning that for 100 years, there was zero inflation and 100% purchasing power. The Federal Reserve was created pursuant to an Article 5 convention, theoretically, to stave off inflation and to keep unemployment low. 100 years later, in 1913, we'd had 2 depressions, 8 recessions, unemployment, 2 world wars, and to buy those same goods and services in 2013 that you could purchase for $100 in 1913 would cost you $2,150. In other words, we had 2,000% inflation over 100 years. This is the Federal Reserve. Now, there have been 4 presidents of the United States that verbally expressed either their disdain for the central bank or their desire to end it. The first one was Andrew Jackson. Of course, they tried to end his political career. He managed to survive. The second president that wanted to end the central bank was Abraham Lincoln. Now, we know what happened to him, but can we really say that it had absolutely nothing to do with his desire to end the central bank? The third president who publicly stated that his intention was to end the central bank was JFK. We know what happened to him. The fourth president who wanted to audit, if not end, the central bank was a president whose mentor was Andrew Jackson, and who had a picture of Andrew Jackson hanging in the Oval Office. That was Donald Trump. What happened to Donald Trump? Removed from office under, I would say, somewhat dubious circumstances, but even if that's not the case, he's following the Andrew Jackson model, going directly to the people with his concerns. So the central bank has been very instrumental in, frankly, the problems we face right now. And there's a reason why the federal government has refused to audit the central bank or audit our gold reserves. That can't be good news. Now, let's review a little bit. As I said, in order to have this controlled movement, we need the Green New Deal. In other words, we're going to operate primarily on wind and solar, which is an absurdity. We know that wind and solar is extremely expensive, extremely ineffective. And, of course, the centerpiece for that now are electric cars. And, of course, the problem with the electric car is it's extremely expensive, it's short range, and it's extremely toxic. I'll just give you an example of just how toxic this is, if I can find the piece I wanted to discuss. You know, we're told that the new Green Deal is done in order to preserve our planet and not to pollute it. But there is absolutely, positively nothing worse for the environment and for the planet than lithium mine. And, of course, much of the electric world that they want to create is going to be running on lithium batteries. There's a reason why an electric vehicle on average costs $56,000. The battery dies within 2 to 3 years, and it costs somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000 just to replace the battery. So the sheer cost to purchase and maintain an electric car makes an electric car unaffordable for half of the country. That's their objective. But I was mentioning the pollution involved with the lithium mines. I want to review with you what's involved in creating a lithium battery. You need 25 pounds of lithium to create this battery. In order to create the battery, you need 50 tons of ore, 60 pounds of nickel, 44 pounds of manganese, 30 pounds of cobalt, 200 pounds of copper, 400 pounds of aluminum, steel, and plastic. And to produce this battery with all of these resources, earth metals, would require the heat that can only be produced by coal, nuclear, or gas-fired power plants. And to top it all, the battery is completely and totally toxic and biodegradable. So we're being lied to about the Green New Deal. The other issue, if I can get back to my notes, I've got so many pages here. Give me a moment here. Was the vax mandate. Now, a public statement was just released by a Dr. Michael Yeadon. He was the chief scientist in charge of the Pfizer vaccination. He released a statement recently. He has absolutely no faith in the efficacy of the vaccine. He says there are substantial side effects and that he does not recommend anyone take the vaccine. And our government, fully aware of what this gentleman's saying, has done what? They've joined into the G20 agreement for a vax mandate in order to travel. Now, I bring all of this up because we're being squeezed economically, philosophically, every way you can imagine. But there is a way you can protect yourself. And it's by utilizing the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, which guarantees your right to contract and your ability to create a trust in order to protect your wealth. Now, as I said earlier, for over a decade, we've been marketing our trust to assist Dinarians, and I've explained ad nauseum all of the benefits of establishing this trust if you're a Dinarian. So I don't want to go over all of that, but I want to go over in a generic sense why every American, particularly now, needs to protect their wealth, their privacy, and their ability to transfer their legacy to their children and grandchildren. Because the federal government, embodied by this lame duck session, as far as I'm concerned, is doing everything they can to take all of that away from us. Now, in my early career, I spent a lot of time in Washington. I worked with a lot of people you see on the news. I know where a lot of these people are coming from. I made a decision, and I believe the right decision, to walk away from D.C., and that was all the way back in the late 70s, early 80s. I saw what was coming. I couldn't believe it. And sometimes I still have a hard time believing what's going on. But our constitutional representative republic is under assault. But the Bill of Rights, fortunately, is still intact. Your Fourth Amendment right is still there. And this is the single best way to protect yourself from what becomes more obvious every day they're attempting to do, by creating a high-tax, high surveillance, high rules and regulations state. I want to review with you basically the benefits of our trust package. If you establish your family asset protection trust package, first of all, your privacy is going to be intact because everything within that trust is sealed and the general public will have no knowledge of your net worth or your actual holdings. In my opinion, it's very simple. Whether it's your next-door neighbor, state, local, or federal government, what you possess legally as a citizen of the United States is none of their damn business. Second, by establishing this trust, you're going to be able to avoid IRS scrutiny. The federal government has tried to create, and they're probably going to even do more with this new tax that they're talking about, create 87,000 agents, supposedly, to audit billionaires that aren't paying their fair share. There are 752 billionaires in the United States. If all of them have committed tax fraud, they don't need 87,000 agents. Those 87,000 agents are there to scrutinize us. But when you create this trust, you have created a situation where it's extremely time-consuming for them to do an audit. So what are they going to do? They're going to move on to someone else. So you need to be the person that's exercised your rights to ensure that they cannot kick down your door without probable cause, without checking all of the boxes, dotting all of the I's, and crossing all of the T's. Third is the issue of gifting. Now, of course, if you're gifting currencies and you have our trust and you are a Dinarian, You can not only gift the currencies pre-RV to avoid a federal gift tax, but if you gifted them through the trust, you will also have control of the post-RV proceeds. But if you're someone that doesn't possess currencies, you're an American citizen, by creating this trust, you can gift to friends and family if you wish, but still retain control of the assets. So during their lifetime, they would have access to something, say a house or a vacation home, but the asset would remain in trust and under your control at all times. Then there's the issue of probate and the federal estate tax. Probate ordinarily can take 6 to 18 months, but if your estate's being challenged, and 1 out of 3 estates is, probate could take years. Then there's the federal estate tax. This is the tax that assessed transfer that estate to heirs. Under current law, as much as 65% of that estate can be taxed away. This is particularly detrimental to family farms, small farms, which they're trying to eradicate. They want to create large farms. They want to control and manage all of that. But these smaller farms don't have the liquidity to pay the tax. However, if, for example, it's in trust, there will be no probate and there is no federal estate tax. Now, the government's well aware of this and they don't like it, but the Constitution is what the Constitution is. This is one of the reasons people are perplexed. States and the Senate, the Congress keep passing laws that people say on their face, but that's not constitutional, that's not constitutional. They're aware of that, but they keep taking a bite of that apple. They keep doing it because they know once they can successfully amend or repeal any of our Bill of Rights, it's all subject to amendment and repeal. And they're not going to give up. They've been at it for 100 years. That's what the progressive movement is. The progressive movement isn't a new thing. The progressive movement began in the early 19th century, early 20th century, in the early 1900s. If you look up the word progressive, it does not mean what they mean. The reason they chose the word progressive is because in their charter, their objective was to progress beyond the colloquial constraints of the Constitution. In other words, if you have unalienable rights, that inherently limits the government, and they don't want to limit the government. They want to limit you. That's what's going on here. Lastly, by creation of our package of trusts, you isolate each object in a separate subtrust. It's called segregation of assets. It means that if any assets involved in litigation, it does not involve all of your other assets and net worth. So this trust is not only indispensable for someone that has currencies, it's not only indispensable for someone of wealth, but given the current political climates, it's an indispensable tool for any American citizen who wants his rights protected against a surveillance state, against a growing government, against the Green New Deal limitations, all of the things that they're trying to do. I said earlier they're creating a feudal state. What is a feudal state? Well, originally a feudal state was the lords and the dukes and the kings and the queens basically lived the way they wanted, did what they wanted, but the serf's job was to create their wealth. And that's what's going on right now. The elite are going to live their lives, their opulent lives. You and I are not going to be able to do that. They hope by making travel so expensive you either won't travel, won't go far, or only use their public transportation subject to their limits. And this is what we want to avoid. So the creation of your trust, again, is not just for denarians, although that's how we initially created this trust. As things have evolved, this trust is an indispensable tool for any American citizen who wants his privacy, who wants to protect his wealth, and who wants to protect his rights from an ever-encroaching government. Now, I mentioned earlier, have a pen and paper ready because I wanted to share something with you. I'm going to give you a little homework here if you really want to understand in a little bit more depth some of the things I've touched on here. I know this is a little bit different call, but, you know, it's been on my heart to have this discussion because Coming from D.C., coming from that background, my worst fears are being realized, and I just don't want to see people who just aren't aware of what's going on or how to protect yourself. Incidentally, all of the things I'm discussing here, all of the people that are trying to run our lives, they have these trusts. They have their assets in these trusts. The saying is, you want to control everything but own nothing, or you want to own nothing but control everything. That's been the mantra for 100 years, and this is what we need to do. It's not a matter of wealth anymore. This is just a matter of protecting what you have. As a matter of fact, I can make the argument the less you have, the more important it is that you protect it. Now, here are the things you need to look into. Google or DuckDuckGo. Google, I'm losing faith in Google every day. You might want to go to DuckDuckGo. What's really interesting, if you take an issue of like violence and you go to Google for political violence and then you go to DuckDuckGo, totally different answers. DuckDuckGo gives you a balanced response. Google doesn't. The first thing you want to Google or DuckDuckGo is Bill of Rights, particularly the Fourth Amendment. The second thing is something called Cloward and Piven, spelled just like it sounds, Cloward and Piven. This has to do with the strategy of open borders. This goes back many, many years. As a matter of fact, when I was in college, I was fortunate enough to go to a very good school. Cloward and Piven were actually invited to our small little economics group at our college to talk with us. I was a freshman at the time, so, you know, they were very good at talking to children, and frankly, as a freshman, I was a child. But by my senior year, after 4 years of intense study, I realized, oh my God, these people, I got squirreled by these people. They're full of crap. Google it for yourself, Cloward and Piven, because that's exactly the strategy being utilized on our southern border today. You need to Google three things: Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, and Agenda 2050. Now, these agendas here are the ones that say, over the century, we're going to eliminate all international borders, and we're going to eliminate all personal property. And as Klaus Schwab with the World Economic Forum says, you will own nothing and you will be happy. What he means, though, is you will own nothing and he will be happy, because he and his bunch will own everything. You will own nothing. Again, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, and Agenda 2050. I will give these globalist atheists credit for one thing. They have told us exactly what they plan on doing. They're counting on people not doing their homework, but they're letting the quote-unquote enlightened know so that they can avoid what's coming. You should Google the Rothschilds or the Rothschild banking system. The Rothschilds have created the international banking system. Countries that don't subscribe to the Rothschild banking system have bad things happen to them. The Rothschilds have financed both sides of most wars for the last 300 years. You also want to Google Executive Order 14067. This is Biden's order on the central bank digital currency. I've discussed at length with the problem with that. And you may also want to take a closer look at the World Economic Forum and, in particular, the writings of Klaus Schwab, because he makes it clear. As a matter of fact, Klaus Schwab, in one of his books, actually said that in order for their plan to succeed, they're going to need to substantially reduce the population. This is going to be accomplished, if not by a series of wars, but by plagues. So once again, they're telling you exactly what their objective is and how they're going to achieve it. So you need to be knowledgeable about these things, because when you understand these things, the light goes off and you begin to understand why you need to create a trust, why you need to close everything away from prying eyes, why you need to make sure that whether you're involved in a civil proceeding or even something that could theoretically be criminal, that you have certain rights that cannot be abridged. So these are the things I wanted to discuss for today in summation. Things are moving forward in Iraq. There was a meeting with the parliament today to talk about the sovereignty of the nation, which inherently must involve their own currency. We've talked a little bit about the situation here in the United States, what's going on with the lame duck session, some of the very negative things that may come out of that session, and most importantly, the things you can do as an American citizen with inalienable rights that despite their best efforts, the people running the country have not been able to take away from us thus far. I'd strongly suggest you Google the things that I mentioned here, and I strongly suggest you contact us to get our initial no-obligation package. It has a lot of information about us, about the trust, about the revaluation of these currencies. The information I gave today to supplement all of that, we'll be happy to send you our initial package. It has everything you need if you wish to proceed, but you're under absolutely no obligation to do so. You can review the package, contact us if you have any questions. We'll be happy to assist you in every way. You can contact us by phone or email. There will be no consultation fee. You can go to our website, which is trusts with an S, unlimitedllc.com. Our email address is trusts with an S, unlimitedllc@gmail.com. And our phone service is 307-274-4122. Again, contact us by phone or email. We'll be happy to assist you. Send our initial package. We will move as quickly as we can to assist you. We've been slammed lately. By the way, I forgot to mention this. I will be returning calls all day today. I will not tomorrow. I will try to get back on the phone Friday, but I will be on the phone the rest of the day returning calls. I'm not ignoring anybody, but we've just gotten slammed with calls lately. Certainly, if something of dramatic nature will happen before our next call next week, we'll try to get out an emergency email and schedule an emergency conference call. But failing that, we will be back next Wednesday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. That's right, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I look forward to speaking with you all next week. Bye-bye, everyone.